She told me she needed space to heal, so I gave it to her. I gave her silence, understanding, and patience I didn't even know I had. But the moment my car stereo connected to someone else's phone and a man's voice softly said, "Welcome back, love," I realized I had been healing the wrong wound. That Saturday morning started like most lately. She was gone before I even opened my eyes, leaving only a faint trace of sandalwood on the pillow and a post-it on the fridge that read, "Gone to retreat. No service. Don't wait up." That was her new rhythm now. Disappear for days in the name of wellness. Breathe. Center. Disconnect from me, apparently. I didn't argue anymore. I had tried once. Told her how the silence between us felt more like a wall than peace. She said I was clinging. That healing meant detachment. That I was mistaking control for love. Maybe I was. So I stopped talking and started listening to everything except her words. Because words can lie. But actions? They hum the truth when no one's watching. I only noticed the Bluetooth detail by accident. I had gotten into her car because mine had a dead battery. I was heading to pick up groceries, simple as that. But the moment I started the engine, the screen lit up with a connection I hadn't seen before. Elijah's iPhone. At first, I thought maybe it was a borrowed device. A classmate's. A colleague's. Someone from her yoga group. But the system said connected previously 9 times. And next to the name was a little heart emoji. That's when the silence inside me cracked. I pulled over 3 blocks later, sat in the parking lot of a bakery I didn't even plan to visit, and scrolled through the audio history. Her car stores incoming audio files, voice commands, even last played messages if they weren't wiped. One was from 2 weeks ago. Titled simply, I tapped it. What I heard wasn't graphic. That would have been easier, honestly. But it was worse in its simplicity. A man's voice, calm and careful, saying, "I felt you drift away this morning. Call me when you're alone, okay? I need to hear your breath." My hands clenched the steering wheel like it could hold me together. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I drove back home and sat in our driveway for 40 minutes, watching the wind move through the trees like nothing had changed, except everything had. That night, I pretended nothing was wrong. She came back around 9 p.m., glowing from the inside out, like someone who had found the meaning of life in essential oils and chakra alignment. She kissed me lightly on the cheek. No eye contact. Just muscle memory. I asked her how the retreat was. She said it was exactly what I needed. I believed her. Because what she needed clearly wasn't me. Over the next few days, I didn't confront her. I paid attention. Her phone never left her hand. She smiled at texts I wasn't meant to see. She hummed more often, soft tunes she used to sing only for me. And the worst part was she looked peaceful. That kind of peace that comes when someone finally makes a decision, whether or not they've told you yet. I started researching. Quietly. Thoroughly. I found the retreat listing on an obscure invite-only wellness app. The same one she'd mentioned before. A place called The Nesting Path. Very exclusive. Very spiritual. Very co-ed. Reviews were hidden. I had to create a profile just to browse. So I did. And that's when I saw him. His photo was buried under Facilitator Teen. Name, Elijah Brandt. Description, Breathwork Specialist. Emotional Integration Guide. Trauma-informed. Ivy League smile with forest eyes. He looked exactly like the kind of man who would say things like, "Your body remembers love," and get away with it. And suddenly, so much made sense. I wasn't dealing with a one-time mistake. I was watching a carefully built emotional world, one that didn't include me. But I wasn't ready to destroy it. Not yet. I needed more than suspicion. I needed the truth in her own voice or in his. And as fate or technology would have it, the truth had already left crumbs behind. That Wednesday, she left for another overnight retreat. She said she needed to recalibrate. I said, of course. And once she was gone, I took a risk. I checked the backup files on her laptop. It was linked to her cloud. She didn't realize her phone synced media automatically. It took me 30 minutes to find it. A short video. Poorly lit. No faces. But the audio was sharp. I knew her laugh anywhere. The clink of 2 glasses. The music playing in the background, a French pop song we used to dance to in the kitchen. But now it belonged to them. She said off camera, "You always make me forget the world." He replied, "That's because with me, you don't have to be someone else." My chest didn't tighten. It hollowed. And in that space, a plan began to form. Not out of revenge. Not even anger. Just clarity. She was already gone. I was just the last to know. But now I did. And knowing gave me power. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I'd do what she least expected, something kind. Something final. The end wouldn't be a war. It would be a silent exit through the door she never noticed I had been standing at all along. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Not because I had to, but because sleep no longer felt like a place I belonged. My body rested, but my mind paced relentlessly. Every sound in the house felt amplified, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the wood beneath my steps, the lingering echo of a love that had grown silent long ago. I made coffee. Black. No sugar. No cream. The kind I used to hate but had grown to prefer, not because of the taste but because it didn't pretend to be sweet. While it brewed, I stared out the window at the empty driveway. Her car was gone as expected. She'd texted me the night before, driving straight to the lake house for a deeper session. Should be back late tomorrow? No heart emoji. No warmth. Just logistics. The same tone you use with a neighbor feeding your cat. I took my mug and went into the garage. That had become my place lately. Not for projects or tools or even space. Just silence. Controlled silence. A kind of exile I chose for myself because being in the same house as her, pretending to be okay, had become a form of slow death. I sat in the driver's seat of my own car, turned off, keys untouched, and let the heat of the morning rise around me. I kept thinking about that voice memo I'd found in her car, how casual it sounded. Like I didn't even exist in the world he spoke into. I wasn't a threat. I wasn't even part of the equation. Just a placeholder. I had become invisible. That day, something shifted. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I wasn't going to let the truth drip out in digital fragments while I sat quietly trying to hold together a broken mosaic. I needed to see what she'd built behind my back. I needed to see all of it. So I did what I promised myself I wouldn't do. I logged into her private email. It wasn't hard. We'd shared passwords for years. She never changed them. Or maybe she just didn't think I'd still care enough to check. The inbox was full of the usual clutter, promotions, newsletters, appointment reminders. But then I found a folder titled Retreat Notes. That's where it all was. Pages and pages of journal entries, workshop reflections, open letters she wrote to herself, and saved messages from Elijah. He had sent her audio files with breath guidance, meditations, words of affirmation. But they were never generic. They were laced with things only she would understand. He spoke of her weightless smile, her need for approval, the grief she swallowed as a child, and the invisible cage of expectations. These weren't just affirmations. They were emotional blueprints. And she had given him the map. I scrolled through an unsent letter she had written but never delivered. It was titled, To the Man Who Used to See Me. It began, I wish I could explain how heavy it is to feel unseen. How I sit across from you at dinner and wonder if you know who I am anymore or if you even want to. She described moments I thought were happy, laughing on the porch, watching movies on the couch as performances she had mastered. He thinks I'm still here, she wrote. But I left months ago. I just didn't take my body with me. That line stayed with me. Burned itself into the center of my chest like a permanent reminder that love isn't lost in arguments or betrayals. It's lost in the quiet days. The ones where you stop asking questions. Where you stop looking. I closed the laptop and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, watching the coffee grow cold in my cup. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I thought I would be. I thought rage would be the next natural stage. But no. What I felt was older than anger. It was disappointment layered over years of denial. And under that, a strange sense of relief. Because I finally knew. And now that I knew, I could stop pretending. The hardest part wasn't the cheating. It was realizing how long I had accepted less than I deserved. How often I had excused the distance. How many times I had told myself that healing took time, that love evolved, that maybe this was just how marriage was supposed to feel after a decade. But love doesn't feel like absence. It doesn't feel like a locked phone and a stranger's voice through your car speakers. It doesn't feel like you're trespassing in your own home. I spent the rest of that day cleaning. Not out of anger. Out of preparation. I opened drawers, packed quietly, folded shirts with care. I labeled a box with her name. Filled it with little things, birthday cards, ticket stubs, photos of us in places that used to matter. I didn't shred them. I didn't burn them. I just gathered them into one place, like closing a chapter. I even cleaned the guest room. Changed the sheets. Vacuumed. Made it livable. That would be my space for now. Until I left for good. I wouldn't sleep next to her anymore. Not out of spite, but preservation. I couldn't lay beside a person who belonged to someone else even if her mail still came to this address. That night, she came home glowing again. Tan from the sun. Smelling of lavender and cedar. She kissed me lightly, called me babe, and said the retreat had been transformative. I smiled. Said I was glad. She didn't notice the slight distance in my tone. Or maybe she did and didn't care. We ate together. Talked about nothing. Watched an episode of a show we used to love. She laughed once, an easy, careless laugh that echoed like a stranger in my ears. Later, she showered, slipped into bed, reached for me. I told her I was sleeping in the guest room because I had a headache. She nodded, unconcerned, and rolled over. No questions. No protest. She didn't even look up. That was the moment I understood how truly gone she already was. Not just emotionally, but spiritually. She had crossed into a life that no longer included me, and I had spent months holding the door open. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. I wasn't going to be the doormat for someone else's self-discovery. I deserved better. And I was going to give that to myself. Not by forcing her to choose, but by choosing for myself. The plan was simple. One final dinner. One letter. One clean exit. And no one would see it coming. The next morning, I woke up before her. I always did now. I listened to the faint rhythm of her breathing through the wall, the quiet hum of our home at rest, and for a second I wondered if I was being cruel. Not for planning to leave, but for pretending everything was fine while quietly unraveling everything behind the scenes. But then I reminded myself she had been pretending far longer than I had. And if truth was something she could bury in Bluetooth logs and locked phones, then silence was a language we both had learned fluently. That day I moved with purpose. I wasn't angry. I was focused. I drove across town to her favorite market, the one with the overpriced olive oil and smug chalkboard signs about sustainable joy. I bought the pesto she liked, the wine she always insisted tasted better than anything aged, and a loaf of bread still warm in its paper bag. I even grabbed fresh-cut flowers, peonies. The ones she used to place by the window in spring. The ones she forgot she loved. That evening, while she was still out teaching a healing expression class at the community studio, I cooked. I lit candles. Not for romance, but closure. I pulled out the real plates. The silverware we never used anymore. I set the table like it was 2014 again, like we still laughed easily and didn't flinch when our hands brushed. It looked perfect. Which felt poetic because the next chapter of my life would begin in the ruins of that illusion. At exactly 7:45, I heard the keys in the door. She stepped inside with her usual breezy entrance, humming softly, bags dangling from her wrist, and then paused when she smelled the food. Her eyes flicked toward the dining room. "What's this?" she asked, brows raised. "You tell me," I said gently. "Just thought we could have a quiet dinner." She hesitated, clearly uncertain if this was a trap. But I kept my expression calm. "Open." She slipped off her sandals, walked over, and sat down slowly. "You made salmon?" "With lemon herb crust," I said. "And the pesto." "From Bellows." She smiled, tight and polite. The kind you offer to a stranger doing something kind but unwanted. We ate in near silence. She asked about my day. I answered briefly. I asked about her class. She gave me the bare minimum. We were two people dancing around the ghost of intimacy, pretending to have a conversation while burying every truth beneath a napkin fold. Halfway through dinner, she took a sip of wine, tilted her head, and said, "Are you okay? You're being thoughtful." I nodded. "I'm fine. Just wanted one more good evening." "One more?" she asked. Her voice tried to stay light, but there was a tremor underneath. I stood slowly and walked to the counter. I picked up the envelope I had placed there earlier that day. Her name was written on the front in simple block letters. No flourish. No emotion. Just clarity. I returned to the table, set it beside her wine glass, and sat down. She looked at it for a moment without touching it. "What is this?" "Everything you'll need," I said. "The apartment is yours. I'll be staying at the Candlebrook for now. There's a keycard in the envelope. And a list of passwords I've updated. I've already contacted a lawyer, his info is inside too. We don't need to drag this out." She opened her mouth to speak, but I gently raised a hand. "You don't have to say anything. You already did. Just not with words." She blinked. Once. Twice. Then slowly reached for the envelope. Her fingers trembled slightly. She didn't open it. Just held it like a fragile thing she didn't know how to carry. "You're leaving?" she finally said. "I already did," I replied. "This is just the paperwork." She stood abruptly. Her chair scraped the floor with a sharp sound. "Wait, Milo, don't do this. Can we talk?" I smiled sadly. "We had 1,000 chances to talk. You chose someone else to talk to. It wasn't what you think, it never is," I said. "But what I think isn't the issue. What I feel is. And I feel finished." Her mouth opened again, but no sound came. I saw the tears building in her eyes. I had once longed to be the reason behind her emotions. Now, I didn't even recognize the face they lived on. I picked up my overnight bag from behind the couch. It was already packed. Clothes. Charger. My grandfather's watch. A photo of my parents at their wedding. Only the essentials. I walked to the door and paused. Turned around once more. She hadn't moved. Just stood there, one hand on the back of the chair, the other still clutching the envelope like it might explode. "You'll be okay," I said gently. "You're good at moving on. You've been practicing for a while now." The last thing I saw as I closed the door was her silhouette in the candlelight, standing in the ruins of a dinner she never expected, in the middle of a goodbye she never thought she'd receive. I didn't drive straight to the hotel. I sat in the car for nearly an hour, letting it sink in, letting the weight of a decade peel off slowly. The silence wasn't cruel. It was clean. At 1:41 a.m., my phone lit up with a message. Her name. No emoji. No subject. Just 3 words, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. The cursor blinked, waiting. For years, I had filled that space with reassurances, apologies, questions, please. But this time, I typed slowly, "There's nothing left to say. I wish you peace." Then I turned off the phone. Not out of bitterness, but because some chapters don't end with a bang. They end with a whisper and the quiet that finally feels like your own. The next morning, I walked down the street to a small cafe near the hotel. The waitress smiled. Not the strained smile of obligation, but a real one. She called me Han and poured coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. I sat by the window and watched people go by, walking dogs, holding hands, pushing strollers. Life in all its normal, unremarkable beauty. And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel out of place. I didn't feel like a ghost in my own skin. I felt still. Not healed. Not yet. But still. And that, I realized, was the beginning of something better. Something honest. Something mine. The first few days at the hotel were strangely quiet. Not in the way that made you feel alone, but in the way that reminded you how much noise you'd been carrying for years. I didn't miss the sound of her brushing her teeth with the bathroom door open or the way she used to hum while scrolling through her phone. I didn't miss the awkward dinners or the constant sense that I was intruding in my own home. What I noticed most was how much lighter I felt. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was the absence of that slow suffocation I'd mistaken for normal. I started to rebuild my days in small pieces. Woke up early. Took long walks. Ate breakfast at the same diner each morning where the same waitress, Sandra, greeted me with a warmth that felt almost medicinal. She never pried. Just smiled, poured coffee, and once left me a little note scribbled on a napkin that said, "You look better this week. Keep going." I don't know why, but I folded that napkin and kept it in my wallet. A totem, maybe? Proof that even strangers could notice what someone close had missed for years. I didn't block her number. I didn't need to. She texted once more 3 days after I left. Just a single line, "Are you really not coming back?" I read it, stared at it for a few minutes, and closed my phone without responding. I wasn't being cruel. I was protecting my peace. I knew if I replied, I'd get pulled back into a conversation that had already died. A marriage isn't undone in a single betrayal, it's undone in the 1,000 little moments afterward when the person who hurt you tries to fold time backward with empty words and late remorse. And I was done pretending that time could be rewound. I met with the lawyer that Friday. A kind man in his 60s who didn't try to sell me strength but gave me clarity. He looked over the documents I'd prepared, nodded, and said, "You've handled this with more grace than most." I didn't feel graceful. I felt like someone who had quietly bled out behind a curtain and was only now stepping out into daylight. We filed the paperwork. No drama. No fight. She didn't contest anything. I half expected an emotional voicemail, maybe a sudden plea, a last-ditch apology. But nothing came. And that silence, in a way, was its own confession. She had already let go long ago. All I'd done was catch up. I moved into a small place on the east side of town. 1 bedroom. Clean kitchen. A window that faced the park. Nothing fancy. But it was mine. The first night there, I stood in the center of the living room holding a box labeled Essentials and just breathed. No shoes by the door that weren't mine. No scent in the air I hadn't chosen. No weight pulling me toward a version of myself I no longer recognized. I didn't decorate much. A few books. A couch. That old wedding photo, I placed it in a drawer. Not out of bitterness. Just honesty. I started hiking again. Just little trails at first. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't trying to find myself in the mountains or pose in front of waterfalls for a redemption arc. I just wanted to move. To sweat. To feel the rhythm of my own feet hitting earth and remember what it meant to carry my body without dragging someone else's weight with me. On one of those hikes, I met a man named Marcus. Mid-50s. Divorced 10 years. He struck up a conversation when he saw me struggling to open a granola bar with cold hands. We ended up walking the last mile together, talking about everything and nothing. He mentioned a support group at a local rec center, nothing formal, just people showing up on Tuesdays to talk about rebuilding after loss. I showed up the next week, sat in the back, listened, didn't speak the first time, or the second. But by the third meeting, I found myself opening my mouth and telling a room of strangers about the moment I found a voice memo from another man on my wife's car stereo. About how I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, just decided I was done. They didn't gasp. They didn't pity me. They just nodded. And that nod meant more than I expected. It meant, you're not crazy. It meant, we've been there too. One woman, Nora, who reminded me of a teacher I once had, said something that stuck with me. She said, sometimes we stay in broken things because we think leaving means failure. But sometimes staying is the failure. Walking away is the brave part. That hit harder than I wanted to admit. I hadn't felt brave. I had felt wrecked. Hollowed out. But in that moment I realized maybe both things could be true. Maybe the destruction was necessary. Maybe it cleared space for something real. I started writing again. Nothing big. Just thoughts. Bits of moments. Sentences I didn't know what to do with. I wrote about the night she laughed at her phone while I sat next to her, invisible. I wrote about the silence in the cabin. About the look on her face when she saw the envelope. I wrote it not to publish it, not to share it, but because some truths only feel real once they're outside your head. I didn't date. Not yet. I wasn't looking for love. I was still relearning how to sit with myself. How to be alone without feeling lonely. How to make dinner without wondering if it would go uneaten or ignored. I bought new bedsheets. Chose a color I liked. Not the ones she would have picked. I bought myself flowers once. Because I wanted to. I didn't need a reason. I realized one night, while standing in my small kitchen with music playing softly in the background, that I hadn't cried in weeks. Not because I'd grown numb, but because the hurt had finally started to settle into something else. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace. A quiet knowing. And then, one evening I got a message from her again. Just her name on the screen. I hesitated but opened it. It said, I miss you. No explanation. No context. No apology. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for a reaction that never came. I felt nothing. Not hate. Not anger. Not desire. Just absence. Like reading a line from a story you once knew by heart but no longer remembered why it mattered. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I let it stay there. A small reminder that some people aren't meant to be in your future, even if they once defined your past. The next Tuesday, I sat in the support group again. Someone asked me how I was doing. And I said, I think I'm okay. Not good. Not great. But okay. And that's a start. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons shifted. The trees along the main street where I now live turned from green to fire-colored, then bare. I kept walking those same streets every morning, passing the same baker sweeping his doorstep, the same woman jogging with a golden retriever, the same man who sold newspapers no one really bought anymore. I knew the rhythm of it all now. My new life wasn't filled with excitement or grand declarations, but it was mine. Entirely mine. Some days I still thought of her. Not with longing, not with resentment, but with a quiet recognition, like seeing someone from a dream you once had. I remembered her laugh, the way she used to sing badly in the kitchen, how she looked the first time we met, full of ideas and questions and fire. But I didn't miss her. That was the strangest part. I thought I would. I thought I'd spend years aching. Instead, the more distance I put between us, the more I realized how much of myself I had abandoned just trying to keep her close. And the version of her I missed? That person hadn't existed for a long time. I just hadn't been willing to admit it. The paperwork was finalized on a Tuesday. I remember because it rained that day and I sat in the lawyer's office watching drops trail down the window like threads unraveling. He handed me the final documents, nodded politely, and said, "You're officially divorced." I nodded too. "So what now?" I asked. He smiled. "Now you start living for yourself." It was a simple answer, and one that terrified me more than it should have. But he was right. I left the office, walked through the rain without an umbrella, and didn't care. I let the cold hit my skin, the wind tug at my jacket, and for the first time in years I felt completely awake. That night I wrote a letter I never planned to send. It was addressed to her, but really it was for me. I wrote about the mornings I made coffee just to hear another sound in the room. I wrote about the dinner I cooked, the envelope I slid across the table, the silence that followed. I wrote about the man I used to be, the one who tolerated being ignored, who thought being steady was the same as being loved. And then I wrote about who I was now. About how I no longer counted unread messages for meaning or listened for keys at the door with hope. About how I no longer bent myself into silence just to keep the peace. I signed it, folded it, and burned it in a ceramic dish on my balcony. I watched the paper curl into smoke and thought, this is what letting go really looks like. A few weeks later, I started teaching part-time again. Literature. Community college. Nothing fancy, but enough to feel useful. My students didn't know my story. To them, I was just Mr. Hale, the guy who always brought real books and talked too passionately about metaphor. But that was okay. I like being someone new. Or maybe just someone real. At one point during a class on personal essays, one of the students asked, "Do you think writing can actually heal people?" I paused, looked out the window. Then I said, "I don't know if it heals, but it helps you remember." And that's where healing starts. I didn't mean to get deep, but I saw a few of them nod. Maybe they understood. Or maybe they were just being polite. Either way, it felt good to say it out loud. One night in early spring, I walked past the old park near the neighborhood we used to live in. It was empty except for one couple sitting on a bench, laughing about something small and stupid, their hands intertwined like they didn't know the world was watching. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't envy them. I just hoped they kept holding on to whatever that was. Because when it works, when it's real, it should be like that. Effortless, unhidden, warm. Not a performance. Not a secret. Not an apology waiting to happen. Eventually, I stopped checking if she would reach out again. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. It didn't matter. Her story wasn't mine anymore. And mine had just begun again. On a Sunday afternoon, I found myself back at the trailhead of the first hike I'd done after leaving. This time, I brought a journal. Not to write anything profound. Just to jot things down I didn't want to forget. Like the smell of pine needles when the sun heats them. Or how the creek sounds different in spring than it does in fall. Or how peace feels when it finally stops hiding. And maybe that's what it was all about. Not moving on with someone else. Not finding a dramatic, better ending. But finally learning how to just be with yourself in silence without fear. If you're still here listening to this, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you're in the middle of it right now. And if you are, I just want to say this, you're not crazy. You're not weak. You're not too sensitive. You're just someone who gave more love than they received. Someone who deserved honesty and presence and didn't get it. And maybe walking away doesn't feel strong in the moment. But someday soon, you'll wake up and realize you're breathing easier. That's when you'll know you didn't lose. You let go. And that's not the end of your story. It's the start of the one that's actually yours. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll take a second to subscribe, leave a comment, or even share your own story below. You're not alone, and maybe, just maybe, your voice is exactly what someone else needs to hear today.